Greetings to everyone here and everyone watching via the Climate Week Virtual Summit. My name is Nicholas Glover, and I'm with the Tampa Bay Chamber in Tampa, Florida. Welcome to the launch event for Florida Race to Zero. We're here today to talk about how the combined power of Florida's mayors and cities can move public opinion on the all-important issue of climate change and carbon neutrality. And we're also going to talk about how the unique credibility of mayors and the work and the commitment in this space that they're doing helps to make the business case for fighting climate change and helps to bring more partners to the table and more allies along from the corporate and economic universe. We've got four incredible panelists who are leaders in their respective communities. John Klopp is the Special Projects Coordinator for Climate Change Mitigation with the Office of Sustainability and Resiliency at the City of Miami. Chris Castro is the Director of Sustainability and Resilience at the City of Orlando. Whit Raymer is the Chief Sustainability and Resiliency Officer at the City of Tampa. And Sharon Wright is the Sustainability and Resiliency Director for the City of St. Petersburg. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and get right into our conversation today. I think you can make the case that at least here in Florida, our mayors are the best examples of what it means to put partisanship aside and to work collaboratively. But what we're doing here, is a bit more formal and a bit more ambitious. Chris Castro, can you talk a little bit about how the idea for the Race to Zero collaborative effort came to be?
Most certainly. Thank you so much, Nick, and it's a pleasure to be here with my colleagues across the state. So this Race to Zero campaign is a big deal. It's an evolution of the climate commitments that cities all around the world have been making. And ultimately, it's trying to get us to a zero carbon economy by 2050 and to align with science-based targets, trying to get to 50% reduction in 2030 and 75% reduction in 2040. So back in the fall of 2020, Mayor Dyer here in Orlando, along with Mayor Suarez in Miami and Mayor Castor in Tampa, teamed up to co-write an op-ed entitled "Florida Cities Can't Fight Climate Change Alone." The essence of this article was really calling out for more collaborative action and to combat climate change at all levels of government, across the private sector, and really trying to get Floridians themselves on board with this movement. That piece ran in at least 5 major newspaper outlets, not only across the state of Florida, but was reported in dozens of other publications and news outlets nationwide, gathering millions of impressions and the attention of our state and federal elected leaders. So in short, our mayors really started to catch the attention, not just of them, but the business community and a whole new slate of political allies in some of the most consequential regions of the state. And that got a lot of us thinking, a whole bunch of us, not just here in the city, but a lot of our allies as well, in terms of how do we replicate the impact of the piece of an ongoing basis in order to move public opinion? How might we harness the collective influence and credibility of our Florida mayors to create a new kind of climate caucus here in the state and bringing along small, medium, large-sized cities as well as counties? And at the same time, while we're having this Florida conversation, there's an international Race to Zero campaign that we talked about being formed by ICLEI. And, can we do a similar type of effort here in the state, maybe kickstart these statewide Race to Zero campaigns as well? And so that really brings us to our conversation today and why myself, we have Whit, we have Sharon and Jonathan representing those 4 major cities that kickstarted this conversation to really dive deeper into what we're doing to take action on climate change and advance a more sustainable Florida.
Thank you, Chris. Whit Raymer from the City of Tampa, why is it so important to broaden that tent of people who care about climate neutrality? And second, how are mayors and how are they uniquely positioned to help us achieve that goal?
Yeah, thanks, Nick, for the question. And really, it's just a pleasure to be here with my colleagues. And I appreciate everyone from the Volo Foundation and Chris for your vision really coming together here for Climate Week. Cities are the closest level of government to people in neighborhoods. They really keep a beat on what's happening here. And there's just a trust factor, I think, that mayors and cities have that probably isn't as strong with other levels of government. You know, there's a saying, there's no such thing as a Republican pothole or a Democrat pothole. There's just a pothole. I can tell you, as someone that responds to these issues for the mayor, there's two things that'll get their attention: litter and pothole. And your government exists to kind of fill that pothole. And people expect their governments to get stuff done. And that's exactly what we do here at the local level. Here in Tampa, actually, last week, we just launched the Fix It Fast program. You can call 274-FAST, and we will fill your pothole with a goal of 2 hours. You know, unfortunately, I don't think that we have that type of speed for climate change, but we truly need it. And that's, you know, we need to, I think, bring people into viewpoint here in Florida that this doesn't have to be a controversial or decisive political issue. I mean, when it comes to making that case to Floridians, it's the mayors that I think really have a unique role to deliver this message. And that's why Miami and Orlando and Tampa and St. Pete are really in the right place at the right time with the right market influences. You know, kind of with that idea in mind, I think we're all here to help kind of create an organization that takes these mayors and doing our work kind of siloed in these communities, but connecting them all together and amplifying them with a goal of bringing new partners to the table and really moving the needle on statewide public opinion so we can all get behind these critical, important issues of climate and climate neutrality.
Thank you, Whit. A question to Sharon Wright from the city of St. Petersburg. What does expanding that tent actually look like?
What does it look like? What's different about maybe this organization? First of all, happy Earth Day, everyone. And thanks, Chris, and others, Jonathan, for getting this going. As I have seen what networks up to this point can do at a national and local level together over the last decade, bringing this campaign to Florida now in 2021 with a different time, with a broad community and business understanding, broader than what we had before. There's so much great but challenging work to do. It doesn't matter where or what color your seat is in that tent. We have work to do together. We can start at many different places. Cities Race to Zero and the Florida campaign, it does provide a framework that many of our Florida and international mayors, of which Florida does have a few, to see that impact that we're having together. At times you say, why is just my city or these few cities working on this when there's a whole planet and a set of industrial and post-industrial countries to address? But when we see the impact of 4 or 25 cities together, it can be very motivating that it does make a difference environmentally and economically. I'm sure I'm not the only one in this group that gets the calls from visitors about what's the most sustainable hotel, what's the most sustainable restaurants. I also get calls from employers and employees looking to relocate, and they see the national stories about Florida's vulnerabilities to sea level rise and climate effect, and they want to know what we're doing and if it's even worth coming down to look around. And this framework can help us point to all that we are doing. We do have to demystify how our state gets to carbon neutrality for those who don't work in this professionally. And for many of us, it started with the vision. That vision was often blown off, but we quickly surprise ourselves. One example is our municipal solar implementation work, which I'll talk about a little more later. But stating that vision, even here, it was an entrevue and an invitation for our city back a few years ago to go to Vancouver, BC, where I heard stories of what communities were doing all over the planet. And we were able to bring that back here with the confidence that we can do this. It goes from vision to the next steps. We can really do it. That's not to say that it's always easy and that there are not plenty of things that we need to solve and overcome, but having a network like this is like having additional communications and resilience staff almost. So we're excited.
That's great. I understand the initial hook for this campaign is going to be sort of a stylized, friendly competition or a race between the mayors of Miami, Orlando, Tampa, and St. Pete in their efforts to meet the pledges that each one of these cities has made to their respective populations on the issue of carbon neutrality by certain dates. John, I got to say, as a representative of Tampa Bay and the business community, what Mayor Suarez is doing in terms of competition is pretty darn impressive. I'm sure everyone by now has seen the unique way he's using social media to make tech companies aware of all the benefits that Miami has to offer. My point is that our Florida cities are used to competing, and they're used to these sort of friendly rivalries when it comes to important pieces of the economy. And we all know from our work in this space that when we compete, we all create more jobs, we create more opportunity and a higher quality of life for the entire state. So if everyone sort of took the same view on climate change through that lens of competition, then this whole race to zero is a pretty natural extension. That leads me to my question. John Klopp of Miami. You all are making news this week with some sustainability commitments of your own in this shared race. Tell us about them.
Yeah, we've got a handful of different initiatives that we're coming out with this week, including a new stormwater master plan to handle, obviously, issues from high rain events and wind. We also have a beefed up fertilizer ordinance that will address the nutrient runoff into our rivers and waters, and really sort of focus on increasing the health of the bay and the rivers, because those are one of the biggest attractions for people coming to Miami is the water, the environment, and actually is a cornerstone of our economy. I think Mayor Suarez recently famously said that the environment is the economy. Also, I think in terms of that competition and also the collaboration that you and Chris have been mentioning before, we've really been trying to focus on our local initiatives. We have one called Resilient 305 that came out several years ago that's geared towards resilience and adaptation against climate change. That's the Greater Miami and the Beaches efforts. And so that's Miami Beach, City of Miami, and Miami-Dade County all coming together, sort of competing on who can do it the quickest. We have listed goals that were shared, but also trying to do it all together. Beyond that, we also have Miami Forever Climate Ready. Now, that was something that Miami sort of struck out a little bit further beyond Resilience 305 in recent years, trying to push the bullet there. And basically, that there's major things that come out of that, including Miami Forever Bond, which is going to be a major financial tool for moving forward in all of these endeavors that we have over the next couple of years. And is also something that we're trying to do to attract tech and other things like that, since Mayor Suarez is famously, as you mentioned, trying to make the city of Miami Silicon Beach.
Thanks, John. Chris, now it's your turn to talk to us about what the city of Orlando is doing.
Well, I'll tell you, as a Miami native, born and raised down there, it's very inspiring to hear some of these updates, Jonathan, and I appreciate your good work down there. Since 2007, we've been tracking our carbon emissions annually here in the city of Orlando. Mayor Dyer launched GreenWorks Orlando as kind of this vision to transform us into one of the most environmentally friendly, socially equitable, and economically vibrant cities in the country. And that annual tracking has allowed us to monitor our performance over time. Over that timeline, we've seen a reduction of about 20% of our total emissions drop, and even greater when you look at per capita. But truthfully, that's not enough. What we need to start to see is between 5 and 7% reductions of carbon emissions per year to hit the goal. And you can imagine that that's quite a challenge when we're all trying to grow our economy and continue to drive economic prosperity. So based on the data, we've gathered kind of 4 key strategies that we're prioritizing in the short term to race to zero. The first one is building energy efficiency and reducing the energy use in our homes and our buildings. Orlando for a long time has been focusing on this. We passed one of the first green bonds of $17.5 million to retrofit our city buildings, now yielding to over $2.5 million in annual savings. We have been the first city to enable a building benchmarking and transparency policy, requiring that the largest buildings in our city are measuring and monitoring that energy consumption and reporting that data to the city. And we're also working on tools to enable clean energy financing, things like Property Assessed Clean Energy, PACE, or the Solar and Energy Loan Fund, SELF. These 2 programs offer upfront funding for homeowners or business owners to make these improvements. The second big strategy is around grid decarbonization and increasing renewable energy systems. At the city, we're doing everything from installing rooftop solar on critical buildings like fire stations and neighborhood centers. We're hosting solar co-ops to support our residents in investing in rooftop solar, battery storage, and other clean technologies. We're working with OUC, and I think the collaboration with our utility is absolutely critical. And we're working with them to expand community solar offerings, like a new 108 megawatts of solar that came online last summer, and another 150 megawatts of utility scale solar in development. And lastly, on the renewable side, something I get really excited about is on innovation. we are starting to install carport solar canopies over parking lots and even photovoltaics or floating solar on various water bodies, including at the Orlando International Airport, wastewater treatment plants, and other facilities here. The third key strategy is around enabling alternative forms of transportation and reducing vehicle miles traveled. We need to realize that we have to start to enable strategies to get people out of their cars and onto things like micromobility of e-scooters and e-bikes, our Sunrail and Brightline Virgin train, which we're super excited about opening up next year, even autonomous shuttles in certain neighborhoods, and our bus rapid transit. And that brings me to the last strategy, and that's electrify everything. Vehicles, buses, buildings, and more. And in October of last year, we unveiled our first 14 electric buses in downtown Orlando, helping to eliminate the tailpipe emissions, especially for those transit-dependent neighborhoods that rely on that bus service. We just unveiled 100 new public EV charging stations and an electrified dealership program where we're providing financial incentives to car dealerships to sell more electric vehicles. So that gives you a little bit of a taste at a high level of some of the strategies we're implementing and the overall focus areas that we're working on to race to zero.
Thank you. Whit, I'll pose a similar question your way. Time to brag about what Tampa's doing.
Thanks, Nick. Well, you know, if it was easy as just copying and pasting everything Chris is doing, you know, I think we'd love to do that. Chris has really been a trailblazer in Orlando and Sharon in Miami as well. And, you know, that kind of puts us at an underdog position for this race. But in some ways, it also gives us the advantage of kind of hindsight and learning lessons of what's worked well in other cities and how we can, you know, also tailor our strategies to be uniquely Tampa. When I started just under a year ago with the city of Tampa, we started developing our first resilience roadmap, which again, today, I think we're really focused and talking a lot about carbon neutrality, but Chris talked about transportation. He talked about workforce needs and skills gaps. And those are types of things that I think taking a broad view of resilience are really, really important. So we're gonna be releasing our first resilient roadmap, which ties together things like affordable housing, transportation, electrification of the grid, reimagining stormwater retention areas. And following up on that, we're conducting really our first ever true greenhouse gas inventory. You've got to know where you are to make sure you meet where you want to be. And that data is going to feed into our first ever climate action and equity plan. And I want to really focus on two words there. It's action and equity. You know, the science is clear here. We don't, you know, need any more flood risk modeling or maps here in Tampa. We know we live in a beautiful place. Sometimes that comes with risk, but we're ready to get to work. And what does that mean in terms of our comprehensive plan, our land development codes, our building codes? So that's kind of the action side. The equity side, you know, again, several cities have been doing this work for 10, 15 years. And we are now in a position, I think, in our society where we are really understanding the deep and distressed calls to prioritize our frontline communities, our BIPOC communities, that's our Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, our low-income communities. So Tampa is really, really focused on the equity portion of developing our climate plan. Climate impacts people of color differently than other folks. It also impacts low-income communities differently. And we need to understand what those impacts are. We can't presume or even begin to understand that unless we start with listening. And so that's really our approach right now, is to start with listening and have a really targeted and intentional outreach program where we're not only performing climate education in communities that might not otherwise have the space or resources to understand the impacts of climate on them, but also to really listen to understand how these impacts will likely affect them moving into the future. And that's really the equity part of the plan. And once we get these plans in place, then we're gonna hopefully roll out some really exciting projects to help address them.
Thanks, Whit. Sharon, talk for a second, if you will, about how St. Pete is tackling this effort to get to zero.
Sure. I'll repeat a little bit of what Whit said, in that our strategies, for the most part, are very similar to what Chris laid out in a strategy format. And that is not by accident, that is by design. I literally loaded up a van of directors and drove them over to Orlando to work on some things together with Chris's team, a couple of times actually.
Yep.
And so that is always appreciated. So I'll just talk about some of the things that we're really proud of more recently. In launching the solar co-op, Solar United Neighbors, and SELF, that solar and energy loan fund financing mechanism, at about the same time in 2018, we've had a really successful amount of resilience and renewables and solar PV come into our community at the same time. And it really hit a nice equity piece because financing goals were at least 60% of low to moderate income households for energy efficiency and resilience. And we've been able to beat that goal over 3 years. We helped as a city fund that nonprofit collaboration, both of those actually. And now we're proud to say that SELF is here on the West Coast and self-sustained actually. And so we have a new nonprofit. Both of those together had created about 32 jobs over a couple of years in solar and renewables. So that was really great. I'm really proud to, I also wanted to mention for those that SELF also really prioritizes looking at female heads of household, veteran-owned businesses, local contractors, things like that. So we're all in the pursuit of equity and inclusivity through a lot of that. I'm really proud of, we almost made our 2-year goal at the end of 2020 to supplying 4% of our municipal operations energy use with renewable. We came under just a couple of decimal points, but we have some in the pipeline. So we hope to go over that this year in 2021. We've piloted a neighborhood resilience collective kind of based around this resilience hub idea. And that will include resilience as it relates to energy, but also as it relates to our neighborhood residents and businesses. Can't wait to learn more from that. It's important to know that the work we've done together shined nationally and has brought to bear things like the Energy Foundation to put dollars into our local community organizations to work on these type of topics. And so many more we may get into a more casual conversation about, but I'm really excited in the coming year or so. There's a lot of changes, a lot of momentum, and this sort of framework that we've had and strategies we've had evolving. I'm trying to think about it and really want input from all of our cohorts in this area and as part of the campaign to think about it in that climate justice framework. We're well positioned to do that here in Florida, and it will benefit everyone. So I'll stop there and keep it brief because we had some of the same actions.
And if you don't mind, Nick, I might pop back on actually to get a little bit further into what we're doing in Miami.
Yes, please do.
All right, fantastic. So we basically, in 2018, we actually had our, I wouldn't say first, it's our second, but first one since 2007. We had our first greenhouse gas inventory that we performed. And so what we really saw was that we had a little bit over half of all of our emissions are coming from building energy, and most of the rest, for a total of 98%, was coming from transportation. So really what we decided to do was take a green pathway. And so that's an acronym for getting around Miami. So changing how we handle transport, especially in reducing single occupancy vehicle loads. Renewable energy, which is going to involve working with FP&L as well as our other utility providers to change our fuel mix, along with providing incentives, many things that Chris mentioned as well, in terms of incentivizing rooftop solar and other types of movement towards renewable energy. The first E is electric vehicles. So also we're going to be advocating for and promoting the installation and improvement of infrastructure for electric vehicles to really prompt us, since Miami's the largest electric vehicle market, I believe in the Southeast. I'm not sure. I don't want to say the country, but definitely I think it's California. But in Florida, I think Miami has that the lead on that market. So we really want to try and promote that and sort of boost that along, trying to get about 35% electric vehicle penetration into the market by 2035. And then we also have energy efficiency. We also have a BE 305, which is the Building Efficiency 305 ordinance coming up tomorrow for first reading. And that's going to be based on benchmarking and retuning for large buildings. And so we're really trying to get the low-hanging fruit there, since large buildings make up about 2% of our buildings, but about over 40% of the floor space. So we're really trying to really ease into that. And we're trying to give them all the tools they have to actually achieve energy savings, and as well as water. And then the N is a new green economy. So that's where we start building on, looking for where can South Florida go, where can Miami and Miami-Dade County as a region go with the green jobs in the future. So we did an assessment of what we have today, doing an assessment of what the analysis of what the potential is and how we might actually further that through our own policy, looking into how we can be inclusive as we do that and address equity concerns, create job training programs, and sort of, public-private partnerships to make sure that that penetration into all parts of the city.
So for the next few questions, I want you to all feel free to chime in as it makes sense for you to do so. But we're talking about some really ambitious plans. But of course, we know that unfortunately, it's probably not going to be as easy as we may want it to be. So what are some of the hurdles that exist for us to get to this point of carbon neutrality?
So maybe I'll start out and kind of by mentioning, I think one of the hurdles that we face just in general is just this inertia of urbanization, right? Each one of our markets are fast growing parts of the country. We're not dwindling in population, we're all growing. Orlando being one of the fastest in the entire country, and seeing between 1,000 and 1,500 people per week moving to the MSA. If you take that into account, we have to start to think differently about how to provide service for those new residents and ensure that we balance that growth. The other thing is I feel there's been a lack of coordination and collaboration to scale this impact. And I do believe that Florida Race to Zero could very well support us in moving that forward. But there's other networks as well that we should be a part of, including the Florida Sustainability Directors Network, FSDN, which all four of us are a part of. You have ICLEI, we talked about earlier, that basically provides the tools that you need to track and monitor those emissions, and also technical assistance for cities. And so, by us really working together, I think we're going to be able to scale that impact. And the last thing I'll mention is around some state policy barriers. I mean, when you look at the vast majority of how, let's say, renewable energy gets adopted, it's using a mechanism that currently is illegal in the state of Florida. And if we're the Sunshine State and really going to unlock solar as a big part of our economy, I think we have to start to look differently at how the regulatory markets for electricity currently play, and how we need to modify them in order to really take advantage of the economic development, job opportunities that present to Florida, and of course achieving the environmental and public health goals that all of our cities are striving to. What other thoughts do you guys have around barriers for this, big hurdles?
I definitely agree with the momentum we have around development and building. It's really hard to hit while the iron's hot and capture all the things we can now that are going into place. We are doing it, but we don't catch everything. That's a real barrier. I'd be remiss if I wouldn't have also kind of shouted out about our Tampa Bay Cross Bay Ferry that our mayors got together and jurisdictions around Tampa Bay helped to fund to reduce some traffic on the bridges between the two areas of Tampa Bay. Along with our autonomous vehicles and stuff. And we have a brand new Sunrunner coming as a bus rapid transit from the Bay, or from our downtown Bay to the beaches. And I say that too, because Tampa Bay has a transportation hurdle in general as well. We're Florida, as highly developed as our areas are, without more mass high-speed rail, which I know some is now finally coming along. We have a real challenge there. And then broader, it's real easy for me to go to our day-to-day and what some of the barriers are, and definitely working with the state to really change the position of Florida to be viewed more progressively and create those jobs. And for those solar farms, they're bringing some of the energy providers. I don't even know if they're hiring solar installers from Florida because they have territories elsewhere, so why is we need help keeping those jobs here. And then something a little broader, there has been divisiveness. I hope it's getting better. But on this topic, people need to see every day how this is creating jobs and impacting them in a positive way. And it doesn't always have to be the jargon we're using in a campaign or something like that. I think that we should leverage those opportunities we have with this to minimize some of the divisiveness so we can get some work done.
And some preemption bills, right? Like we are seeing a tax on preemption of local government control that presents a barrier as we're starting to make these big commitments. There was a bill that was trying to restrict cities from regulating, clean energy or setting these bold goals. And so I do think that there are some inherent barriers there at the state, but nothing that I think we can't get around. And one of the ways that we're doing that, and in fact, South Florida and Miami led the charge on this, was establishing the Southeast Regional Climate Compact, right? Bringing the 4 counties and the cities within those counties together to start working. And what happened was It took us a little bit, but here in Central Florida, we've established a regional resilience collaborative in Tampa Bay. They now have a regional resilience collaborative up in Jacksonville. They're forming one down in Southwest Florida. They're also forming one, and in Tallahassee and in the region up there in the Panhandle. So we're starting to see now governments realizing that climate change is here. We're being impacted by it today, and we need to start to work together as local counties, cities, and regional governments to begin working as a unit to ensure the long-term prosperity and resilience of the state.
100%, Chris. I completely agree. I think public education is always key in this aspect, and also City of Miami has been working on multiple resolutions lately opposing a lot of these preemption bills that we've been seeing, as well as formalizing our commitment to carbon neutrality by 2050 and by 60% reduction from our 2018 levels by 2035. And I think that exactly the FSDN, SSDN, USDN, all of these networks, as well as Miami is part of the C40 cities network. So I think leveraging all of that for knowledge, for technical support, as well as for sometimes political will is really important.
So we're talking about cities, of course, given your backgrounds, our panelists, but Chris alluded to this. What role can lawmakers play at the federal and the state level to help us get to zero?
You know, I can offer a little bit of insight here. I mean, I think in some ways it's let cities be innovative and let cities do our work. And in some ways it's letting us unlock our potential and kind of just stay out of the way, especially at the state level. But that's not to say that the state isn't recognizing and trying to support some of our climate adaptation goals. You see, I think this speaker promoted a flooding resilience fund worth $100 million this session. That's great. The state is implementing the SLIP requirement, which basically says for any state-funded project, you've got to do a sea level rise inventory projection, which is great. So I think the state is really doing some good work on the adaptation side, but they're doing so kind of ignoring the causal side, which is the mitigation side and reducing those carbon emissions that are causing climate change. So we need to balance a little bit. I certainly appreciate and thank the legislature for their work on the adaptation side, but I think we really do need to think about setting that statewide renewable energy portfolio goals. And at the federal level, you know, the Biden administration, I think, is obviously taking climate change and the goals very, very seriously. I think the Race to Zero campaign almost matches the goals that the Biden administration came out with on Tuesday. That's really exciting. And we need to be prepared. If this federal funding infrastructure package goes through, we need to be prepared and show that we're serious to accept these funds, and we've got great projects to put them towards.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of our building efficiency goals, actually, in terms of getting that emissions number down for buildings, comes from the Biden administration's 2035 goal of 100% carbon-free electricity. So I think really advocating at the federal level, continue to do that is key.
I was just going to jump in on something Whit said. I do agree the state where they are doing a good job as it relates to resilience. I think they could add a little more flexibility and consider people and green infrastructure as highly as we do gray infrastructure. I don't know how many scholarships from the state, not scholarships, I'm sorry, like funding sources from the state level are available right now that talk about assessing, you know, our resilience or our vulnerability. You know, we've done that. We need to be able to use that money to give people jobs and get it. So really, I'm saying loosen up the criteria around these funding sources. Let us use it and get it to the people and to the infrastructure where it's needed. We are assessed up right now, I would say. And then specifically following that, it's been my experience that, you know, our universities where they could be thinking strategically there, they need to have more real world problem solving on the ground classes around this kind of stuff and a little less academic maybe even some Excel classes. I know that's a little tiny and small, but some real world problem solving and project management experience coming out of the universities in the state and starting that pipeline. The same thing that I think all of our cities do for our small businesses that make us so cool and funky in certain areas. That on a state level, bringing that kind of entrepreneurship to the state would be really great.
And just building on the team here, one, I think they play a very important role around tax incentives. We've seen that the investment tax credit and production tax credits for renewables over the last 10 years has literally driven it to be the cheapest form of new power generation in the 21st century. And we need to continue that, especially as we're starting to see a real rise in the adoption of those technologies, right? The extension of the electric vehicle tax credit, as well as rooftop solar, batteries, and more. The other thing that I thought about was EECBG. If you all remember back in the Recovery Act, the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grants basically spurred the clean energy economy that we're seeing now today in 2021. And it started back in 2010, providing direct block grant funding to local governments in order for them to implement energy efficiency, renewables, other forms of community benefit programs. And I think that really was, again, the spur for continuing to drive the reduction in cost and drive the adoption of these technologies. And now at this critical time, I think the federal and the state government can double down on what they did 10 years ago and help us to go even further in order to hit this very ambitious goal of a zero carbon economy for the entire country by 2050. And not just the country, the world.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. I think I believe when you mentioned the upcoming federal infrastructure package, you all feel free to speak freely. What opportunities do you think will exist with that package?
I like the digital inclusion and broadband piece. We especially learned about resilience over the last year. We had some great organizations here locally that quickly got Gadgets for Good and digital inclusion working groups ad hoc that got technology to students and things like that. But having that be the norm, I'm really excited about that perspective on infrastructure.
You know, one of the programs that I think ties together so much of these issues, and that really is a non-partisan issue, is something like the Weatherization Assistance Program. Mm-hmm. Chris mentioned at the very top of the program, his number one goal is efficiency. So we can deploy all the solar that we want, but if the solar is powering outdated air conditionings, or the air conditionings are going into drafty houses with old windows and unclocked doors, that's not helping solve the problem. And I think these weatherization assistance programs, where you can provide blue collar skills trade to go in and do window replacement, roof replacements, updating HVACs with higher SEERs. This is a program that puts money and projects directly into lower income neighborhoods. And frankly, everyone deserves an energy efficient house. And to be able to reduce those bills right now, when rents are going up, sometimes by 30 and 40% year over year, in some of the fastest growing cities here in the United States, where we're all, I think, wrangling with affordable housing issues, being able to keep people in their house and lowering utility bills by these weatherization assistance programs, I think will be a massive boom to the skills economy.
Beautifully said, Whit. And I do think that that weatherization improvement could really do a lot for each one of our cities and beyond. The other aspect of this infrastructure that I see is that they're thinking about infrastructure more broadly. It's no longer just roads and bridges, but they're really thinking about it, to Sharon's point about the digital divide and how now connectivity and broadband is a public utility that almost is an imperative one in our day and age, and is critical. The other one that we hear the Biden administration talking about is how bullish they are around EVs and the advancement of 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations by 2030. I talked about us unveiling 100 of them on public property, but we're not even a drop in the bucket, right? All of us have a lot of work to do to set up the infrastructure for the inevitable transition to electric. There's also a doubling of public transit funds in this infrastructure bill that's being proposed. That's incredible, and it'll help to spur more BRTs. Sharon talked about a new one coming to St. Pete and in the Tampa Bay area. That is amazing. We need more of that. And the last thing is around public school buses as well, not just transit buses. There's going to be a significant amount of funding on transitioning public school buses to electric and really trying to move the needle on that. At the state level, there's been Volkswagen settlement funding for this, and you know, we've all been trying to go after using some public dollars, but I do think that this infrastructure bill could be transformative, and as many are saying, once in a generation, potentially once in a century opportunity here.
Thank you, Chris. Let me ask you this question for the entire panel. What role should the private sector play as part of the race to zero?
Well, they should play a role in matching the commitment and doing what they can in their own business operations as well as their customers to move towards carbon neutrality by 2050. There's a lot of things that business also can do to help spur the, and catalyze the scale of what we're talking about here. We often talk about public-private partnerships and the ability for us to work together to really expand the impact. And here in Orlando, we are working closely with a lot of the business community to get them on board. We've seen our local Advent Health, our local hospital chain, just added a massive rooftop solar carport on their parking garage. They're making really deep investments into renewables and efficiency. And we're seeing even the business chamber here, the Orlando Economic Partnership, we call it, is starting to host events and starting to position their marketing of our city in the light of a environmentally friendly leader on climate. And I think hopefully we'll get more businesses to join community solar programs, to invest in their own rooftop solar, to transition their own fleet vehicles over to electric, to change their procurement policies. The list goes on. Businesses have a huge driver's seat role to get us to zero.
Yeah, we were working with developers just today on our new EV readiness ordinance to get their input and making that awareness around electric vehicles and electrification in general. We have a benchmarking pilot, which is with the private sector buildings. Now that we feel like we're doing enough to start to set an example, we can start working with them to reduce energy in their buildings. And similarly, some of our largest employers have their own sustainability fairs that we get invited to. I don't even have to hold events anymore. But I also think that everyone, at least some of the large employers I've spoken with here, everyone is looking back at the last couple of years and really, I hope that they will truly take all of that to heart and really think about what is health and wellness and economic viability all together, and taking that time at the speed of trust when it's necessary to bring everybody into the fold and really grow together. It will benefit the businesses in the long run, I think, quite a bit.
And I would say, in addition to the building of energy efficiency, since really that's mostly private buildings, we're talking about in fixing procurement and supply chain issues. There's also promotion of public transit. A lot of businesses can maybe, medium-sized businesses and larger can especially promote their employees to take public transit and provide options that would encourage that.
Yeah, I think it's a testament that Nick, you're here with the Tampa Bay Chamber facilitating this panel. I think kudos to you and Bob Rolek, the CEO of the Tampa Chamber, sits on Mayor Castor's sustainability and advisory team. And so, we all are counterparts in these municipal communities, but you look at every Fortune 100, every Fortune 500 company out there, and they all have sustainability resilience officers or ESG managers. Yep. This is serious business. And, I go as far as to say that, a lot of companies in more progressive states are moving to Florida, and many of them have their own ESG goals, reporting goals, and they're asking tough questions. Are the utilities going to be able to help provide and meet those commitments that they've committed to themselves? And they're going to look to cities that are taking the lead on this, and we need to be receptive to those market pressures that are becoming realities here in Florida.
Yeah, I'd underscore, and I totally forgot about the utilities, but there are a lot of private utilities here in the state of Florida, and they are all going all in on renewables. And it, quite frankly, I'd like to think it's because they're trying to save the planet, but in reality, it's because it's, again, the cheapest form of power generation that they can build today in Florida without state subsidy, and they're still, and they're really scaling. And so I do think that, they play a huge role. The other interesting hat tip is that Florida will welcome the first B Corp certified climate focused bank in the country, and it'll be situated there in St. Pete. They're opening up shop over there in Sharon City. And I think that that's a huge testament that even the financial institutions are pivoting to figure out how not only they themselves from an operations perspective can get to zero, but how can they provide creative loan products that help our business community and residents move in that direction as well. So some really exciting things happening here in Florida.
And I would say, maybe to distill some of what Chris was saying there, it all comes down to innovation. And so we have to innovate to find ways to address the situation we find ourselves in climate-wise. And we also see some technologies in the offing. So there's going to be technological things that we have to focus on coming up in the future, moving towards hydrogen and other things like that.
Excellent. There's definitely a role for us all to play. And as we near our time together, how can participants in Florida Climate Week support your efforts?
Go to FloridaRaceToZero.com.
Sign up, take a pledge. A lot of you are already doing a lot of those actions, and it's really nice to put us all in a framework together, as I mentioned earlier, so we can see that impact together. It only takes a minute.
If you're in a city or county government, I'd say try to elevate this campaign up to the mayor and see if your city or county can actually join this campaign, not just the Florida Race to Zero, but also the city's Race to Zero campaign internationally. I'd also say that if you're not within a city and you're a resident, I'd have you reach out to your local city or county government and ask them if they are participating in this campaign, and if they're not, why. Right? We all have a role to elevate this conversation, both in cities and without of them. And so everybody can take that action. It's as simple as reaching out to a Sharon, Whit, Jonathan, or Chris, or reaching out to your commissioner, district commissioner, and or directly to the mayor, and letting them know why you think it's important that we take action on the climate crisis and we do everything that we can to protect Florida's future.
Excellent. John, Chris, Whit, Sharon, I want to thank you so much for your time today with us. It's a very important conversation. And just to reiterate, if you want to find out more about this incredible effort, you can visit FloridaRaceToZero.com, FloridaRaceToZero.com. Thank you all for participating. That concludes our program today.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Thanks, Nick.